Hey everyone, today we're diving into some of the creepiest and strangest things people have encountered while driving down the highway, from eerie figures to mysterious encounters. These stories will give you chills. If you love spooky content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us for more. A meteor falling out of the sky. It was like 10:30 at night. In my peripheral vision, I thought maybe it was a single firework, because it was bright. I looked up and saw a bright green ball shooting across the sky. I was overcome with fear for a split second, and the thought flashed through my head. I hope I don't die right now from a warhead or a huge meteor strike. It fell across the horizon for what seemed like forever, before it appeared to burn up. It turns out it landed a state away. No one got hurt, but it was definitely copper, because it was glowing bright green. The 3 cars ahead of me had all pulled over, just as I did, which I didn't notice until I pulled back onto the road. It was seeing these other people witness what I just had that solidified what had happened for me. It was seen falling from the sky in the surrounding 3 states. This was in the Midwest. It landed in Minnesota one early morning, about 6 a.m. I was driving with a friend on the highway in the twists and turns of a mountain valley. We were just having a casual chat in the car. Nobody was on the highway at that time of day, and even less on this part of the highway. I took a quick peek in the rearview mirror and saw a car coming. Not fast, but fast. I told my friend to watch out for the incoming car, because I thought they were coming way too fast and weren't changing lanes to pass us over at the very last moment. My friend kind of swerved a little toward the right of the lane, and the car behind us hard swerved toward the ditch. Car disappeared in the deep ditch and reappeared jumping about 4 to 5 feet in the air toward the highway at about 100 kilometers per hour. With the momentum and back on the highway, it was like it was nothing. The driver speeds up, and we lose him ahead of us, as he was going about 140 kilometers per hour after the near-death accident. We were absolutely shocked and couldn't see a word for like 2 to 3 minutes. We assumed the driver was asleep, and at the last second we saw he was going to ram us and swerve toward the ditch. Shock probably made him speed up after the impact. It was crazy and surreal because there was nobody else for miles around, even after that. I was in high school. I was with 2 other friends driving out in the middle of nowhere on rural roads like nothing but cornfields for miles at a time, with a farmhouse. Every once in a while, it was late at night, perfect for teenage kids to be out doing shit they weren't supposed to be doing, drinking and smoking weed. All of a sudden, with bright lights a ways behind us, we are all thinking it's a sheriff's department car and that we are totally fucked. Within a couple of seconds, the lights are right on us, so bright that the entire inside of the car is so saturated with light that we can all clearly see each other's bewildered faces. And as quickly as the light is upon us, it is gone pitch black as it was merely seconds before. No sounds, no lights in the distance, just darkness. To this day, I have no idea what happened. It was about 25 years ago, and I can still picture the moment vividly in my head. I still run into one of the guys I was with every once in a while when I visit my hometown, and we always reminisce about it while our wives laugh at our crazy stoner story. I live in a rural part of the UK. I was temping just after uni at a remote castle in the middle of fucking nowhere. It was around 2 a.m. driving home across a moor, and I go over a hill, and I come across a group of ponies, just chilling in the road. I almost had a heart attack. The emergency was successfully stopped. Another time I was driving home again at night. It was pissing down with rain, so I was driving slowly on another rural road. Road ahead seems to be moving. I slow down to a stop and realize my road ahead is covered with frogs. Fuck's sake. So with my head beams on, I stopped, got out and thought the best thing to do was to chuck all these frogs over the hedge. Someone came in the other direction and stopped and watched me hurdle several 100 frogs over a hedge. So on this occasion, probably scared them. I've also come across a naked rambler, his junk just swinging in the breeze. I swear a lot in my car. I was driving a 2-lane road that runs through my little country town one winter morning at 5 a.m. to get to a radio show I was hosting. I'm doing like 60 miles per hour, and all of a sudden, I look to my left and see a pale face literally next to me. against the glass driver's side window. I was seriously spooked and thought I'd seen a ghost. I looked in the rear view and saw nothing but darkness. I got to the radio station and couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I decided to look up the local news and saw that a man had been hit by a truck at the same spot, literally 2 or 3 minutes after I'd driven by. I quickly realized the face I saw was a man trying to kill himself by hurling himself across the road in front of my vehicle. But he didn't quite make it. The next car driving in the opposite direction got him. I called CHP and told them my story, and asked them to tell the driver so he wouldn't feel as guilty knowing this guy had intentionally killed himself. Dude's truck was totaled, and I have no idea if CHP ever relayed my story to the driver. My wife and I were driving to work. It was a couple of days before Halloween. While we were driving, a lady just stumbled out of the wooded grove. She was covered in blood. At first I thought it was just a costume and told my wife to look instantly. My wife's face turned white, and she said, "That's not a costume." The lady collapsed, and my wife pulled over. She jumps out of the car and runs probably 450 feet to the lady on the ground. Me, seeing every horror movie out there, starts to scan the area, making sure the person who did something isn't still out there. My wife starts screaming, "Caleb, bring water." Now I was scared. Lots of school shootings and LV shootings were on my mind, so I slowly made my way. She screamed, hurried the fuck up. I started to jog, and by a truck in the woods was a body just laying there. Soon, others stopped and started helping. 15 minutes later, an ambulance arrived. Turns out, she was shot twice in the chest and once in the stomach. The guy by the truck was headshot and died instantly. They were trying to grow marijuana and had their farm robbed. She was in the ICU for 3 weeks, made a recovery. They said, "My wife didn't keep the pressure on her chest, she would have died." We still went to work that day in rural East Texas. I was driving through some very thick fog on a back road. I could only go about 25 miles per hour, since I could barely see the road in front of me. An important part of this story is that I was driving an old pickup truck without a lift. After creeping forward down the road for a good while and being scared out of my mind, I got the feeling that I could see the outline of something up ahead, and I should slow down more and try to move to the side of the road. As I got closer, I could tell that the outline I saw was a dead hog, common for East Texas. But it was one of the biggest hogs I've seen, easily 400 pounds less common. And then it started to move. It lurched to the side of the road a few times like it was being dragged by something. I thought, wow, that's a strong person. Should I help them move it so no one gets in a wreck? But before I stopped my truck completely and got out the thing that was moving, this 400-plus pound hog stood up, and I found myself at eye level with the largest dog I've ever seen in my life. This dog stood looking me directly in the eyes while I sat in the driver's seat of an old Chevy truck. I've honestly never seen anything this big before, and I wasn't sure if this was a farm dog or a Beowulf. Not only was it shockingly tall, but it had the mass and strength to drag a behemoth by itself. It had shaggy white fur, so it reminded me of a Pyrenees, but it was easily 1.5 times the height. Took us probably 15 seconds of shock on both parts of staring before I said, "Fuck this shit," and rocketed out of there after I got home going 50 now. I thought about, damn. Not only was that a monster, it was smart enough to move the hog off the road before eating it. I'm convinced to this day it was some East Texas old god. I had just finished university for Christmas break, but I couldn't get a ride back until Christmas Eve. My stepdad drove 2 hours to pick me up at 6 a.m. We could be home for 8 nights for a family event. Didn't know we wouldn't make it. Of course, the roads were fairly dead. It was winter, so sunlight was scarcely present, but it was just light enough for me to spot something incredibly pale sticking out of a garbage bag on the side of the road. I thought to myself, was that a human fucking leg? And my suspicion was soon backed up by my stepdad. Did you see that? Did that look like a leg to you? As I said, the roads weren't busy at all, and with it being the earliest time of day in known history and Christmas Eve, we actually pulled over and reversed down the motorway just enough to be able to see it. I couldn't make out what it was from where we sat, so my stepdad, who insisted I stay put in case there was a psycho on the loose, got out to take a look. He confirmed it, a motherfucking human leg on the side of the road. All kinds of thoughts passed through our minds. Was it an accident? Was there a cannibal one drumstick short for Christmas dinner? We called the police, who got to the scene faster than I thought possible, and began asking questions. They sent us on our way eventually, and for days afterwards, we couldn't find anything in the news about it. It wasn't until a month later that they called my stepdad to follow up and confirm that foul play was ruled out. But that leaves more questions than answers. Really, my stepdad thinks a medical waste truck may have had the locks malfunction on its doors based on the appearance of the bag. It was apparently very heavy duty. I can't imagine how that would go unnoticed. My uncle kept having dreams about him driving. In his dream, he would drive around this cliff area when he came to this sharp curve that was unguarded on the side that was so steep that it basically ran to the bottom of the mountain. When he got to this corner, his tire suddenly just exploded. Same tire for every dream. He would then have an out-of-body experience and watch his car drive off of the cliff, and he would fly out of the car and tumble down the hill, mangling himself the whole way down. He would then lay on the hill for 5 days without being found. Kept having this dream for about a month. It officially creeped him out to the point where he went to the auto repair shop to get it checked out. It turns out that there was a flaw in the exact same tire that was blowing up in his dream that would have made the tire explode without warning. They didn't know how much longer it would have been, but they said that he was lucky that he came in when he did. The dream stopped after that. A couple months later, he went to visit my grandma and granddad when he was driving somewhere very familiar. That's when he realized it was the exact same cliff in his dream. He stopped the car, pulled over, and stepped out to take a breather. He had taken the route before, but the cliff had never stood out to him before. Although our family is very religious, he never really believed in it, but he swears that something out there is protecting him. When he was telling me and my sister this story, he was shaking because it still scares him to this day. He truly believes that he would have died on that day. I had traveled about 5 hours to attend a family event with lots of people I hadn't seen for 20+ years. I had my 5-year-old son with me, but my husband had to stay home because of work. Crazy, drunk-stoned hippie aunt came up and said, "I see an owl on your shoulder protecting you." Okay, love. See you again in another 20 years. Lay off the bomb. Driving home, it's about 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. Still probably 2 hours from home, kids asleep in the back, and I start to have little danger naps. So I pull over at a rest stop, thinking I'll jump out, have a quick cigarette, and get back to it. I get out of the car, and just standing there a meter from my door is a big white barn owl. What the fuck? I have my smoke while this thing just stares at me. Not even blinking. Amazing. I get back in the car and decide to have a quick sleep before I start driving again. Okay, better safe than sorry. Maybe the owl is trying to tell me something. Maybe it's 2 a.m. and I'm delirious. About a half hour later, I wake up to this terrible banging, scratching noise. I open my eyes, and this owl is on the bonnet of my car right in front of me, and it's jumping up and down, flapping its wings and banging into the bonnet, in the windscreen. Okay, what the fuck, mate? I go to get out of the car to shove it away, and when I look out my window, there's a man right there staring at me through the window. He was smoking a cigarette. I still don't understand how it happened so quickly, but I just locked the doors, started the car, and started to back out of my parking spot. The man jumped at the car, trying to open the door and punching at the window. I just drove out of there as fast as I could and sped down the highway until the adrenaline wore off. Then I pulled up, had a bit of a cry, and realized I could call the police. Nothing ever came of it. They never found the man, and I think they thought I was a bit insane. Anyway, it was as if there was really a strange man in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. I was probably just dreaming, overtired, imagining things. I'll forever be grateful to that big white barn owl. My dad is from Louisiana, so we used to spend a few weeks in the summer there. Growing up, one night, my cousin brother and I were fishing for catfish in the middle of nowhere. We catch a few, load them up and head home. It is about 1 or 2 a.m. as we were driving out of the woods in the middle of nowhere. There was a group of about 30 to 40 people staggering around the road. These people looked really pale, and their clothes were all beat up and worn out. We stopped the car to watch them and to see if they would pass, but they just kept staggering everywhere, aimlessly. So we started to move the car slowly in between them, but right as we got in the middle, they started to come at our car and try to get in it. And we floored it and got out of there. It was one of the weirdest things I have ever seen in my life. Probably some crazy cult or something like that. One time I was driving with my girlfriend through Wisconsin on the way back home. It was really late, like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I stopped at a gas station to fill up. My GPS ended up putting me on a small highway instead of the expressway right away after leaving there. But I didn't want to complicate things more, so I just followed it. My girlfriend was sleeping, so I had the radio off and drove in silence on this really dark, creepy highway. There were deer crossing signs, so I was driving extra cautious, as a family friend had recently hit a deer in their truck, which did quite a number on it, and also caused her to break her arm from the impact. I saw there was a pretty sharp curve coming up, so I slowed down to make it carefully, and as I'm turning, I see a figure exiting the darkness of the woods. It's a large mountain lion with blood stained all over the front of its face. Scare the fuck out of me. I pulled up just after the turn and tried to wake my girlfriend up. I could see its large shadow make its way across the road in my rearview mirror, but by the time my girlfriend woke up, it was gone. She had lived in Wisconsin most of her life, and immediately dismissed my claims that it was a mountain lion because they are not really from that area. I told her I knew what I saw, but she insisted that I was seeing things. I acted like she was probably right and continued the trip back. But I know what I saw as a kid, maybe pre-teens. I was headed up north on a family vacation. My brother, sister, and I were in the back of a truck with a covered topper. We had plenty of blankets, pillows, books, toys, and even a boombox to keep us occupied, plus a window into the cab that we could open if we needed anything. At some point, early in the morning, while my siblings were asleep, I found myself just staring out at the stars against the black sky. That's when I saw something no one would ever believe, not until years later. Anyway, a flash of bright orange lights lit up and zoomed across the night sky, intertwining and weaving about as they flew across my view out of the side window, vanishing almost as quickly as they appeared. I had seen my first UFO. I was convinced I was also the only one to see it. My mom said I was probably asleep and dreamed the whole thing, but I know I was awake. I know what I saw. I knew life existed outside of our planet, and I knew they were here. Years later, I was riding in the family SUV as we headed home from visiting family. Mom was driving, and my siblings were once again sleeping, when suddenly it happened again. The same orange lights were flying across the night sky. But this time, instead of a mix of wonder, excitement, and fear, I burst out laughing. My mom had just rolled her window down and flicked her cigarette out the window. My 2 buddies are driving back from Colorado in the middle of the night when we see a blue truck pulled over on the side of the interstate. It's pitch black, nothing for miles, and there's a girl standing out in the road. Girl comes up and starts explaining that she ran out of gas. Now maybe I'm a bastard for thinking this, but when people start to interject God into what should be normal conversations, my bullshit meter starts going off. Every sentence contains some reference, and she must have blessed us 15 times. Then we realize she's standing there holding a big gas tank. Now I'm sure some people have gas tanks in their trucks, but I've never seen anyone drive around with one, so it came across to me like she had done this before, and the gas tank was like a prop. However, the last thing that really made it creepy was that as the conversation was wrapping up, I noticed a flash of light in the truck. When I asked her what it was, she said it was her boyfriend. There was no mention of the boyfriend before, and who sends their girl to stand in the middle of the interstate at night? So we're a bit weirded out, but we end up taking the gas tank and filling it up and start looking for a cop to tell him where they broke down and have him deliver the gas. Wouldn't you know it when you want to find one? There are no cops in sight. So we end up driving back over there. But we passed them a bit. The girls started running up to us, but we didn't want to risk getting jumped or something, so I opened the passenger door, set the gas on the side of the interstate, and we peeled off, never to be seen again. My family's station wagon blew a flat in the middle of the night on I-95 as we exited the city of Miami. I was 5 years old and riding along with my mom, grandparent, sibling, and dad, who was driving when the tire blew. It was the 1980s when the tire blew. Everyone freaked out a bit. For some reason, my dad kept driving on the flat, even though we were traveling at a high speed. Eventually, the tire wore down or fell off, and we were riding on the rim, sparking down the freeway in the middle of the night. I remembered the energy in the car turning to fear. Something was off. I was told when I was older that my dad saw a man in the center median throw a strip of nails attached to something into the middle of the highway, which my dad could not avoid. It turns out that people were using this method to rob and carjack highway drivers in the middle of the night. My dad somehow was aware of what was happening and responded accordingly by not stopping to change the tire for several miles. Luckily, we had a full-size spare. We changed the tire several miles down the road and made it home safely. I was once driving through the middle of nowhere in Kentucky. Quite late at night along the way, I passed a church, which wasn't uncommon in the area. I'd seen a lot of them that evening, but this one had several strange things about it. First, the parking lot was full, like there were people there, but the light coming from the church, the main visible light, was from the top. I think it's called a steeple, but some from windows too, was a really weird red color, rather than what you'd normally expect to come from a building lit up at night. The third and creepiest thing was that there was a cross out front on the lawn that looked like it had been thrown out of the church. It wasn't upright, and it wasn't flat. It was stuck in the ground via the top and one of its sides. It wasn't huge and looked like one person could easily carry it, and it gave the impression that someone took it out of the church and flung it away. The whole thing creeps me out. To this day, it must have been about 4:30, maybe 5 a.m. I was driving for 3 or 4 hours to a paintball tournament. Can't remember which motorway I was on here in the UK. The sun was barely coming. There was just a slight hint of daylight on the horizon. There are only a few spots of light in the sky, a long straight piece of road, and then something, probably a meteor, flashed a line across the sky just above the horizon, directly ahead of me. I saw it so clearly from right to left. I'll never forget the tail, though it was a straight line at first, then flicked into a curve toward the end of it. Whole tail was out the length of, if you were to measure the sky using your thumb and first finger, as wide apart as you could get. No idea the actual length. The whole event appeared, flashed, and was gone within less than a second. It was as if someone had flicked the sky with a paintbrush. It was white, but had a multitude of color toward the tail end. As it disappeared, almost pinkish orange and purple. The tail was wider at the end too, like when you take a brush, draw a line lightly, and then end it by pressing down harder. It was really beautiful. I got behind a pickup and saw someone sitting in the bed of the truck. At first I rolled my eyes. Sitting in the bed of pickup trucks is not totally uncommon where I live, but it's super dangerous on the highway. Usually it's stupid teens who are invincible, or just a large group of people who couldn't all fit in the cab. Still, full speed on the highway is rare. Then I got a closer look, and it was just a single woman back there, a grown woman, and I could tell by the shadows in the not very tinted windows that there was just one man driving. The passenger seat was empty. The woman's hair was whipping all around, and when it cleared from her face, I could see she was crying, like chest heaving. Crying. So a grown man driving alone in a cab with a grown woman in the bed crying is driving down the highway. My only guess was that it was an abusive or kidnapping situation. I just can't think of any other logical or good reason for a scenario like that. I called 911 and tried to stay behind them, but eventually lost them in the traffic. I was at least able to give the operator a description of the truck and woman and the direction they were going in. The operator, on hearing the description and what I saw, sounded very concerned. I never found out what came of it. I'm driving home one night, probably around 11 p.m. and really somewhat foggy out. Now my car's lights aren't the greatest, but she's my baby, and I deal with her eccentricities. Another of which is that the radio was bugging out. So I'm driving home in silence, and it's dark out. I've got about a 35-minute drive, and I've been driving for about 25 of those 35 minutes, and I'm absolutely exhausted. Now, to give some perspective on how this goes, you need to know a few things about me. First, when it comes to ghosts or the supernatural, I just don't believe in it, and I never really have. I don't get easily creeped out or scared by horror movies, long rides in the dark, or anything like that. I'm of the mindset that it just has to have a basis in reality to be truly scary or to get under my skin and bother me. Second, even though this is the case, I'm a huge horror movie fan, especially of Japanese horror movies, and even their remakes like The Grudge or The Ring. They just have a way of sticking with me, and I quite like that. So, as I'm driving home, as I say, I've only got about 10 minutes of the drive to go, and the fog increases dramatically to the point where I almost can't see the road, even with my high beams on, but I know the road I'm on. I've driven through it probably hundreds of times before, and I'm just taking my time. So should any deer or anything dart across my path, I can stop without hitting them. This road and the surrounding area oftentimes do have deer crossing them, so I knew to be on the lookout for them. However, as soon as this thought goes through my head about being cautious of deer, I get this eerie feeling, almost like déjà vu. I've had this thought before and driven this road before, and it had been this foggy before, and immediately there was a few feet of clarity. That is, there was no fog at all in my forward vision for a few feet, but there was fog creeping across the road itself. I could see straight forward, and I slammed on my brakes in the middle of the turn. There was a very skinny little girl standing in the middle of the road, maybe 5 inches or 5 completely motionless, with long black draping hair in front of her. And as the rest of the fog dissipated, I realized what I was looking at. There was a flag, half-staff, next to a mailbox at the turn of the road I was driving, and my mind had created something that I never believed in. And for that brief second my heart stopped, and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Truly creepy stuff. About a month ago, I was on my way home from work late at night, around 12 a.m. The road was pretty empty, and I was just listening to some tunes, excited to just hop in bed when I got home. But off in the far distance, as I was driving along, I saw a large figure lying down on the side of the road. The first thought I had was that it was a deer or some large animal that had been hit by a car and pulled off to the side. But as I got closer, it started to look more and more like a man. My thought process was kind of like, haha, that kind of looks like a person. Wouldn't that be crazy? Sure enough, my light shined right on it as I passed. It was a man, and for the second time, I got a look at him. He might have been missing his head. I still don't 100% remember, but part of me doesn't want to. My mouth just fell open, and I just stared at the road ahead, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. There was no one around, except for about 200 feet away, where a woman and her passenger were pulled over and frantically speaking outside of their van. As I kept driving, I saw more and more people pull, over talking to each other. They had obviously seen him too. I couldn't believe it, until I saw him on the news the next morning, and sure enough, it was the woman in the van who hit him. There was no explanation as to what he was doing while walking on the side of the interstate at 12 a.m. I-24 Nashville, Tennessee. In the small southern town I grew up in, there is a highway that is almost never used. It always seemed like a huge waste of resources, because although a large 4-lane highway, it doesn't really connect any 2 major destinations, but it does lead into the city of the major state university a couple hours away. My dad told me the only reason they built it was because some alumni pushed for its construction so that people had an alternate route to get to the university during football season, so that they could drink on the way there. Anyways, my girlfriend and I were driving on this highway one night, where it is a rare occurrence to see another car outside of game days in the fall, and there's a guy standing in the middle of the road. There aren't any lights on the road, It's completely dark, and we almost hit this guy who's staring blankly ahead as we nearly hit him. He never flinched. I just kept staring past our vehicle, pale as a ghost, wearing all black and no shoes. My immediate thought after we avoid killing this dude is, "Osht. He's a meth head that wandered out of the woods somewhere." But he was fairly young and didn't have the look of someone strung out. He never looked at us. He just kept staring into the distance. I rolled the window down to ask him if he was all right, and he snapped and walked to the side of our car. Said he had been in an accident, and kind of stammered out a story. He was definitely in shock, but things weren't adding up. He was saying he rolled his car, but there was no car around. There are rows of pine trees on both sides of the road, so his car couldn't have rolled very far. He wasn't aggressive in any way, and he didn't seem intoxicated, outside of having a far-off stare. And the strangest part of the entire encounter was the way he asked for a ride. It wasn't like, "Hey, man, my car is fucked and I don't have a phone. Can you give me a lift to my house?" He kept saying over and over, "Will you please invite me into your vehicle?" He seemed stranded, and I didn't want to just leave this young guy who, besides being shoeless in the middle of an empty highway, wearing all black, seemed like a fairly clean dude. But I had this knot in my stomach. I was about to drive him to the closest gas station when I, probably just recovering from the adrenaline dump of having nearly run over someone, noticed he had no wounds or blood on him. I told him we didn't have phones and to wait by the side of the road while we drove to the convenience store to call police, and drove off in the rear view. He just stood there watching us drive away, sort of like how we rode up on him as soon as we rode off. My girlfriend said she thought he might have been a vampire. No, we saw no wrecked car on the remaining stretch of highway, and the police never caught up with him to see what his deal was. But it was freaky as shit. If you are reading about this vampire man, wear shoes to make yourself more believable next time. One summer night, when I first met my husband, we decided to drive to Charleston, South Carolina to visit my sister. That part of South Carolina is still very old world and haunted. Trees are draped with Spanish moss, and it is hot and humid and bug-infested. The whole scene was straight out of Scooby. Dew, as the sun started to go down, began cooling off. So we started waking up. My car had no AC, and we were overheated and silent. It was rapidly getting dark when I realized there were no streetlights. There were no streetlights, and we hadn't passed a gas station in a very long time. We weren't encountering other drivers anymore. I asked my husband if he wanted to drive, and he said, "Yeah, that part of SC is flat. The roads are straight, and there are fields, trees, and swamps on either side." Far ahead, I could see a light, maybe a street light of some kind. I planned on pulling over there to change places. I started slowing down as we got closer. We'd been approaching it for a really long time when I saw that the light was moving flames. It was a car engulfed in flames in the middle of nowhere, burning on the side of the road with no one around. I was so bewildered by what I saw that I'd taken my foot off the gas as we approached. My future husband said, "Go," and I put my foot down. He then told me there were a couple of people standing just in the line of trees. They were hunkered down at first, but when I slowed down, they stood up. This was before cell phones. We just fled. There was no mention of anything about it on the radio or in the paper for the next few days. I sold my car and moved to NYC, then moved back to Texas. 8 months later, I bought a used car, and after having not driven for almost a year, on the first trip on the highway, some big truck with a subcontractor decal on the side was on his phone and almost wedged me against the cement barrier on a 2-lane overpass in Dallas. I slammed on the brakes and honked at him, and he corrected himself. Then he got in front of me and started slowing down to like 45 miles per hour. I tried to pass, and he kept overtaking me and doing the same thing. I honked again and flipped him off. Oops, mistake. And he started driving in the lane left of me at exactly my speed, holding his middle finger at me while keeping the same speed and staring me down. Then he popped open his glove compartment and looked like he was reaching for a gun. So I slammed the fuck out of my brakes, dangerously, crossed 2 lanes to exit, pulled into an alley in a residential neighborhood, and just sat in someone's driveway for like 10 minutes, until I calmed down, hoping he didn't follow me. One night, my wife and I couldn't get our 3-year-old and 1-year-old to go to sleep. They were driving us both a little crazy with constant crying. None of our usual strategies were working, and it was making us aggravated at each other. I suggested an evening drive to settle everyone down, and my wife was more than relieved at the idea. We quickly packed up the kids and headed out. The idea was to take a typically quiet county highway for a few miles to the interstate drive about 10 to 12 miles west, turn around and come home. The stretch of this county highway is particularly lacking in streetlight, especially considering it's located in the busy suburbs of New York City. We just left the local road leading to the county highway and gotten up to speed, which was about 50 miles per hour, when I spotted something in the road ahead. This stretch of highway is frequently crossed by deer, and it's not uncommon for freshly struck carcasses to be littered at its shoulder. By the time I alerted my wife that there was something in the road, we were passing it, and it definitely wasn't a deer. We were traveling in the middle lane on a dark highway doing 50 miles per hour, and a person was crossing the fast lane into the path of our car. I don't think my wife and I would have been so chilled by someone crossing this section of road had it not been for the rest of the circumstances. First, as mentioned earlier, we were already a little rattled at each other with the kids not complying with their usual bedtime routine. Next, while my wife was glad to get out of the house on this particular night, nap rides had become a thing of the past since our second child was born. Not only was it twice the work to pack and unpack the kids in and out of the car, but we also had twice the precious cargo to keep safe. It just didn't seem worth the trouble and risk. 99% of the time, this was an exception. Perhaps the thing that shook us both the deepest out on that dark section of highway was that there were absolutely no cars in front of or behind us. This person didn't have to cross at that time. They could have crossed with zero risk, either 10 seconds earlier or later of us passing by. Finally, I thought, the person was holding a big stick or bat. My wife didn't see this, but she was also not the first to spot the person. This stick was what tipped the scale and triggered us to call 911. The 911 operator didn't initially think the call deserved a police response. No one had been hurt, and she said people crossed the highway there on foot all the time. It wasn't until I mentioned that I thought the person had a stick that the operator said she was dispatching someone to check it out. We hung up, relieved that perhaps we'd help prevent someone who was either crazy or intoxicated from hurting someone else or themselves. What we didn't know this whole time was that our 3-year-old was aware of everything that was happening. He had not fallen asleep yet, and heard us call 911. And specifically mention that a person was in the road. I suspect that he detected we were alarmed. When we told him it was a deer on the road that we called the police about, he said, "But I heard you say a person, not a deer." We felt bad lying to him, but at the time, seemed like the right thing to do was persist it had been a deer and encourage him to go to sleep. We continued on towards the interstate, quietly talking about the circumstances that led us to call the cops, convincing each other it was the right thing to do. Both kids were sound asleep by the time we made it to the juncture where I'd planned to turn around. I don't usually take the same way back home from places, just for a change of scenery. And this is what I'd planned to do on this night. As we took the eastbound service road towards the alternate route home, traffic came to a stop because of a car accident ahead. There was still an opportunity to take the same interstate back, so I took it somewhat relieved that we could pass the same spot where the person was in the road, maybe getting closure that nothing bad had happened. We were only on that same dark county highway, heading towards home for a few minutes, when I saw the flashing lights against the trees lining the highway. They were still mostly hidden around a big bend in the road ahead. I slowed down, my heart sinking with my wife's, the both of us already knowing what had happened. We were the first car to be stopped on the highway in full view of the blanket covering the body. In the eastbound fast lane, it was only about 15 yards away. One cop car was near the body, and another was back further. parked across the middle and in slow lanes. One shoe could be seen in the middle lane, close to the body. The other could be seen 30 yards down the highway near the shoulder. Between the shoes were small broken car parts littering the road. Down further, 2 cars stopped on the shoulder with their flashers on. As the Capoose car was closest to the body approached our car, I heard stirring in the back seat. Oh no, I thought. Thankfully, just as our 3-year-old popped his head up and asked what was going on, an ambulance pulled behind the cop and blocked the view of the body from our child, before the cop could say anything. We told him what we'd seen right at this spot only 15 minutes before, while heading in the opposite direction. We told him we were the ones who'd called 911 while out on our nap ride, and he told us to stay where we were so he could get our information. While we waited for the cop to come back to us, the cars had started to stack 5 to 6 deep behind us. We watched our opportunity disappear to be granted a quick K-turn and exit off the highway at the entrance not far back, which some drivers had already started to use as an exit. 3 hours later, we made that K-turn on the closed highway, exited the entrance, and went home. First 15 minutes of that time were spent lying to our 3-year-old, saying that deer who'd been hurt on the highway needed ambulances too. He wasn't buying it. Finally, he fell back asleep in the days that followed. Both my wife and I were sad and reflective about the situation. We talked about it a lot. We hugged each other and cried. We told family and friends about it in as much detail as possible as part of an unconscious therapy process. Having to rehash everything with an investigator a week later only extended the sadness. But we got closure when the detective called us back in the second week. He said that he was passing on a message from the family of the man who'd been struck and killed, thanking us for providing a description of what happened to their dad in the last moments of his life. The way the detective described it didn't make complete sense to them. It seemed that they were grateful to us. Nonetheless, this one isn't scary or creepy, but I certainly thought it was strange. I was young, rather poor, and I was driving in the middle of nowhere on a straight, flat road at about 85 miles per hour. I can't remember where I was going, but if I recall, it was on US 90 in South Texas. My windshield wiper fluid was out, and at that age, I didn't care about that crap. So as time goes on, I noticed this weird black cloud in the distance moving rather quickly toward the road. I wasn't concerned at first. It was a comfortable day, and I had my windows open. But I thought, well, let me roll them up. I might drive through that cloud. As I got closer to it, I was wondering, TF is this? It really just looked like a black cloud. Instead of being in the sky, it was crawling near the surface. I really didn't know what it was and was thinking I should stop. But I was really in a rush to get to my destination and thought I'd outrun it anyway. Well, I kept going, and then just as I got to where the black cloud was, I still thought I'd beat it just barely. I didn't. I crossed the street at the exact time, and my windshield got splattered with what immediately appeared to be a massive amount of bees, to such an extent that it almost immediately blocked my view, because so many of them splattered on my windshield. I am not sure if they were killer bees or not at the time, but it caused me to be unable to see, except in one small area. Of course, there was no means to clean the windshield, and I wasn't exactly comfortable just pulling over and cleaning my windshield immediately, so I did the best I could. After reducing speed and driving forward a little bit, after driving for about 5 more minutes, I got out and ended up taking off my shirt to clean it as best I could, until I got to the next town to clean it properly. Thankfully, also having the means to buy a new shirt, I learned how important windshield washer fluid was that day, and ruined a shirt. I don't think I've ever had an experience like that. Again, about 10 years ago, I was in my early 20s on a long trip from WA to Memon. I was driving through North Dakota, that long, boring stretch. It's late at night. We haven't stopped aiming to do the whole thing in a day. I begin to notice a truck that creeps up behind me but doesn't pass. I get a weird feeling, so I mess with my speed up to 90, down to 30. They stay on pace. I'm down to 1/4 tank, so I pull off at the next sign of a fill-up. Truck follows. I'm scared and freaking out. Should I call the police and tell them what a car on the highway is going in the same direction as me? I finally wake my sister, and she tells me to chill. 2 gas stations are in sight. One is open and has no cars. The other is closed, but 2 troopers are pulled on having a chat, thank God. But as I pull into the sweet safety of law enforcement, they both pull away and the truck is following me. I pull up to the pump. My heart is racing, but sis just says to fill it up. As I climb out, I see 2 dudes get out of the truck and watch me. This is where we get kidnapped, raped, and murdered. I get to work, and my sister slides out of the passenger seat. She lights a cigarette. Stupid, but I'm too scared to say anything, and starts to talk to the gents. She asks where they're headed, and they say, Duluth. As I'm screwing the gas cap on, my sister, cool as a cucumber, flips open her phone and takes a picture of their truck in them. She bids them safe travels and climbs back in both cars, get on the highway again. They pass us and speed away. I was driving home from university for a winter break. It's about a 2-hour drive, and I left at 9 p.m. My data for the month had run out, so I couldn't use the GPS on my phone. But I had made the drive a good number of times during the day, so I thought I'd be able to recognize landmarks and streets. Additionally, I couldn't make phone calls or text unless I was on Wi-Fi, so my phone was the equivalent of an iPod Touch. I ended up making a wrong turn and found myself utterly lost driving through the back roads of Virginia. I would later find that I had made a turn that was taking me southwest instead of northeast. Perfect, I know. No, it was nearing midnight, and I was low on gas on extremely dark back roads, rarely passing any other cars. The road I was on eventually came upon a cornfield on my left, and I remember thinking how cool and creepy it looked as a shadow against the night sky. Then in the corner of my eye, I see movement on the road. I immediately swerve, almost losing control of my car to avoid a blue barrel rolling across the street. I slammed the brakes in panic to try to control my car and calm down. As I'm sitting in my stopped car in the middle of the road, breathing rapidly from the stress, I see a flashing light in my side view mirror, like someone was pointing a flashlight at me and rapidly turning it on and off. The light was coming so fast that I knew whoever was holding it was sprinting at my car. I immediately floored the gas and sped off, leaving the flashing light, which was now illuminated as a person by my rear car lights, still running after me to this day. I'm not sure what the person's intent was, but I'm confident they rolled that barrel with the aim of slowing me down or making me crash. I'm glad I didn't stay to find out. Not exactly on the highway, but I used to go on long drives in the middle of the night. I worked the 3rd shift, so I was always awake. I had a route I normally take because I would be smoking and I knew there were no cops. Well, this night, I ended up going out a little further on the interstate and needed to use my maps to turn me back around. So it takes me on this little side dirt road through the woods, which wasn't abnormal because it's kind of a country area in the mountains. So I'm driving through here when my huge black dog jumps out of the woods and starts barking at my car and jumping on the hood. As soon as the dog backed away, I drove away so fucking fast I was horrified. There was another time too when a similar situation happened. I needed my maps to turn me around to get home. It took me down this long rural road that ended at a dead end. What made me really weird though, was that the dead end contained a bunch of old sheds with "Do Not Enter" sign. There was also a bush that had blue string lights on it. It was very strange. I turned around, and when I got back on the highway, I had a car follow me for at least 5 miles back toward town. It was really eerie. My mom, grandmother, and male cousin were in southern Nevada visiting me, and left at night to drive home to the PNW. They were driving the extraterrestrial highway in rural Nevada when a car pulled out of nowhere, no lights on. Even though there was no way logically that the car would be able to stop in time to avoid hitting the car. My mom slammed on the brakes and silently said a prayer. The car stopped fully within an inch of the other car. My mom said she saw the other driver, who was wide-eyed and just kind of waved and drove off. There was no explaining. It's shaken. And almost at dawn, they stopped at the next rest area, which was an hour or 2 later, and let the dog out. The truck stop/restaurant was well lit, but there were no cars in the lot. But a few trucks, the dog started growling and barking. Startled, my mom looked up to see 2 to 3 people in long white robes, which she noted as strange, but was worried about the dog, tired and still shaken. She bent down to comfort the dog and barely glanced up to apologize for my small dog trying to attack them. And she noticed large sternum to pelvis crosses hanging from their necks. She stopped, looked at them, really for the first time, and felt a tremendous amount of warmth, love, and reassurance wash over. He said she was wide-eyed at their attire, but they just made small talk about the dog, bent over and petted the dog and walked away. My cousin and grandmother also saw the people, and they were all in such shock. They got into the car and drove home, never fully talking about it, but acknowledging something larger than anything they could logically explain happened that night or morning. When I spoke to my mom the next day to see how the trip was, she told me about it, and I felt angels, which she silently acknowledged, but never really talked more about. It still gives me chills. Years ago, me and 3 friends were driving home from a weekend trip to another city. It was a 9-hour drive, and we were halfway through, having left around 7 p.m., so it would have been, say, midnight, or a bit before. And we stopped at a petrol station in the middle of nowhere. At the petrol station, there was a skinny girl with long hair loitering around. She would have been about 25, I guess, with a large backpack and a raincoat. We didn't pay much attention, so we get our petrol, get pies and stuff like that, get back in the car, and find she's sitting in the back seat and has put her backpack in there. Okay, now I can't remember the conversation because it was around 30 years ago, but I know she said she was going to the same city as us, so we let her hitchhike along with us because we're nice guys and a bit stoned, and we figured out what the harm was, put her backpack in the boot, and continued on. So anyway, the thing about this girl, so the 3 of us had been away on a weekend where we partied, slept on people's floors, drank a lot of weed, and hadn't had showers, and we were driving around in a beat-up old car. But still, we could smell her over all that. She didn't smell good, and she talked, or rather, mainly monologued, about God and heaven in detail, what it was like, what you do there, about the physical aspects of it, and so on. And it was awkward. In retrospect, a young woman who gets in a beat-up old Ford in the middle of the night with 3 scruffy-looking men she has never seen, smells and talks about heaven, probably has a mental health problem. But anyway, here's the thing. The 3 of us had been taking turns driving, and with about an hour left to go, I was asleep in the back. Next to the girl, the car owner was in the passenger seat asleep, and the driver, unfortunately, he was asleep too. Car veered off the road. We went onto the gravel shoulder and were heading towards the drainage ditch. So it was a very good thing. The girl was still awake and alert, though she screamed loudly. And at that point, all 3 of us woke up. My friend realized he was drifting into the ditch, corrected, and we continued on, all a bit freaked out and wide-eyed. I dropped her off at the farrier, so the unusual girl, in all likelihood, saved us from a car crash. It's very strange how things work out, sometimes. I was driving from Oregon to California with my young daughter to visit family over a long holiday weekend. We messed around and ended up driving the last stretch really late at night. It was a dark, moonless night, and the road was completely deserted. I turned on my high beams to see the road better and traveled with them on for quite some time before I came upon the first vehicle in miles, an old, beat-up pickup truck traveling in front of me. I was tired, so it did take me a couple minutes to remember that I had my high beams on still, and I quickly turned them off, feeling bad, even though it had only been a couple minutes, and there was still quite a bit of distance between our vehicles. After a few minutes, the pickup pulled off to the side of the road, and as I passed it, I noticed what appeared to be a lone male driver. As soon as I passed him, he immediately pulled out behind me, got right on my bumper, and turned on his high beams at that point. I was not too worried yet. Figured the jerk would show me his little revenge and then go around me and flip me off. That is not what happened. Mile after terrifying mile, he stayed right on my bumper with his high beams blinding me. We were on a long, dark section of road miles from the nearest town, and I had no cell service. My daughter had woken up from the high beams lighting up the car, and started to cry just as we were entering a treacherous stretch of narrow two-lane road with sharp curves and steep cliffs. I hoped he would realize at this point that this was now a very dangerous thing to continue. But he did not let up at all. I was scared out of my mind and felt trapped. There was no way I could pull over out there on that deserted road, and there was no way I could lose him on that dark, winding road with my daughter in the car. I was white-knuckling the steering wheel, terrified that any minute he was going to try to force me off the road or I was going to miss a corner and crash. Finally, after about an hour of this, we came to the first small town. It was only another 30 minutes to my destination, but I did not want this guy to follow me to our hotel, so I exited, and he exited right behind me. Turned off his high beams, so I thought maybe this was his destination. I took some turns to appear that I knew where I was going, and I thought I lost him, so I headed back to the highway, and then as I glanced in my rear view, he was right behind me on the on-ramp, and he raced back up on my bumper, flipped on his high beams. At this point, my heart was pounding so hard, and I really started to think maybe this guy's intentions were to hurt us. And I was desperately trying to recall where the police station was in my hometown, so I could drive there if necessary. Then I realized with great relief that I finally had cell service, so I held my lit-up phone in the air, hoping he would see it and get the message loud and clear. And then I slowed down and called 911. The road-raging psychopath immediately took the next exit off the highway, only one exit before my hotel. I was a mess at that point, barely able to explain the situation to the 911 operator. Kindly offered to send someone to look for. I didn't have a plate or even a definite vehicle color, so I declined, but said I would call back if I saw him again. When I got out of the car, I was shaking so badly that I could barely walk. It was definitely one of the scariest things to ever happen to me. I always remember having a call to attend a street to deal with a rabbit that was roaming around the streets, causing issues in a residential street. My partner and I laughed our heads off. It was a slow night, and we had never heard of a job like it in our lives. So we made our way. After speaking to dispatch, we pulled up to the area where we saw this white glowing thing moving at an incredibly fast speed towards us, about an inch from the ground. Well, that was it. We thought our mythical white rabbit. We made our way and then realized it was off the ground and hovering on the road. No, wait. Fly towards us. Bang. It had hit our car. It was a barn owl that basically kamikaze onto our bonnet. We got out one dead or dying owl, freak of nature. We thought we moved it to the side of the road and cracked on. We headed to the street in question, and after 5 minutes, we saw it. Yep. We saw a rabbit running around, just charging around. It was so weird. It was a pet, and it was quite large, left, right, twisting. It was odd. Residents are looking out their downstairs windows. We live in the UK, so rabies is non-existent, and we managed to capture it and throw it into our boots using a traffic jacket. As we drove off, we heard another call about a muntjac deer that was headbutting an iron gate and had its head stuck, which the RSPCA animal welfare team was heading nearby late that night. About 20 minutes ago, a dog attacked its owner. It was becoming weird. A rabbit running around, a suicidal owl, deer going crazy, and dogs all within an hour. We had no idea what was happening, but something was causing those animals to go crazy in that area. Nothing else happened, but that was weird. It just stopped. Many years ago, I was driving to visit my parents. A bit more than halfway there, my car had some engine problems, and I started losing power at the time. I really didn't know much about cars, so I pulled into a rest stop and used the payphone, no cell phone, at the time to call my parents. My dad headed out and said he'd be there in 45 minutes or so. So I went back to my car, pulled out my book, and waited. After about 10 to 15 minutes. A woman and two girls, approximately 7 and 16, were in the car. She came over and asked for some help. The story she gave was that they were traveling south, further than I was headed, and the girls were fighting. The 7-year-old would only listen to her music, slap, and the 16-year-old was fed up. So the woman asked me to take one of the girls, didn't matter which one, and drive south, and she said that she would meet me. Now this raised a lot of red flags. The story sounded weird as hell, and the girls don't seem to be fighting currently. I was also concerned about what would happen if we missed meeting up down the road. I honestly told her that my car was having issues, and I was waiting on my dad, so I couldn't help her. They all got back in their cars and left. I still wonder what her angle was. When I was in my very early 20s, I moved with my girlfriend into the New Zealand countryside. We had a party, and one of the guys who came turned up in a high-powered car. He proceeded to get very drunk, and I asked him for his keys and offered him a bed for the night. The guy refused, and then he jumped into his car. It was surreal, as the sound of the car speeding away was amplified by the surrounding hills. All of a sudden, I heard a huge smash and then silence. Me and a friend drove up the road finding a totaled car, but no passenger. At this point, we were looking for a body, as it was clear he had not been wearing a seatbelt. Out of the darkness, we saw a limping figure coming toward us. I remember seeing his face hanging off on one side. The guy survived, but he had permanent facial scarring. I was once doing a long drive up in British Columbia, Canada that I had never done before. I decided to open a shitty map book and puck out what seemed to be the most direct route there. It turns out half of it was a dirt road highway that led me and my tiny, old, low-to-the-ground sports car to the most hillbilly backwoods area I've been. And I come from what I consider a little hillbilly backwoods area. So I keep driving along, and I get to a spot where some road workers are working away. One of them stumbled toward my car as I stopped the full-on buck teeth, jean overalls with one strap unbuttoned, slurring his words. The road up ahead was so dusty that the hillbilly man decided to lead me down the road in his truck. I was bearably certain I would wind up chained in a basement with some 13-fingered kid laughing at me. But nah, just a nice middle-of-nowhere hillbilly that takes me to the end of that crazy road. My friend and I were pulled over in a lay-by near a burger van alongside a busy dual carriageway, the main route from Brighton eastwards along the south of England, and there was a long section of pavement between the lay-by and the carriageway. We were parked on this side of the lay-by. We had bought our breakfast rolls and just sat back in the car to quickly eat them when we heard a huge scraping, crunch, huge thud, and then what felt like several seconds later, another huge crash. What had happened was that a flatbed truck had lost a wheel. The whole thing, including a piece of the axle. His van had slumped along the curb on the opposite side of the same stretch of pavement that we were parked on. We saw this skid to a stop next to us, in the same moment that we heard the scrape of metal on the tarmac. The thud was the sound of the wheel hitting that same curb and bouncing directly over our car, hitting the upper right corner of the Ford Transit, parked a few feet in front of us, flinging itself high into the air. And then the crash that followed was the moment that it came back down, landing on the windscreen of another van or small truck, which would have been traveling at around 60 to 70 miles per hour. Skidded to a halt some way down the road beside the far end of the lay-by. We leapt out of the car, both being trained first aiders, assuming that we were going to find someone dead or severely injured. Incredibly, both doors opened and two guys got out, absolutely shaken but otherwise unhurt. Out of nowhere, someone with a high-vis jacket appeared and took control of the traffic. We got the guys out of the road and found the wheel in a nearby hedge. It was only when we got back to the car and looked at where everything had happened that we realized that 4 separate sets of fatalities had been avoided. The wheel had clipped the front edge of the van roof, just enough to stop it from passing through the windscreen and crushing the driver to death. The majority of it had clearly landed on the glass. Yes, but this had nudged it just enough. The roof had slightly caved in front of the driver's eyes. The wheel had bounced off the front of the passing van and skimmed the burger van, where a young woman had almost leapt over the counter, knowing that something had happened. There were hot plates and gas canisters in there, which she could have been thrown onto if the wheel had smashed into the van. The wheel could have passed over the transit van. It bounced off of initially and landed in the cab where the occupants were also having breakfast, or, on its first bounce, had it hit transit just a fraction of an inch lower, it could have ricocheted downwards into our windscreen instead of up into the air. Had that wheel hit any one person, they would not have survived. I can tell you that with absolute certainty. The realization of that is the most frightening memory I have. That moment of realizing what could have gone wrong gives me chills to this day. This is the first time telling this story to anyone other than close friends. It also didn't take place on a highway, but I want to tell it anyway. One night, my former best friend and I were driving around smoking weed on the back roads around our town in rural Mississippi. We love driving around and just exploring all the strange stuff you can see out here. So we were on a road that we used to get onto the real back roads. But this time, we decided to take the only left turn on this road. It's obviously not a well-traveled road, but it's paved, which is more than you can say about many of the roads we drove on. We come to the end of the road with it turning into a dirt road driveway, heading deep into the woods on the left, and a driveway leading to a house just off the road to the right, with what looks like a few people standing around a pickup talking. The strange thing is that there is one of those sharp, turned yellow arrows on the tree, a fork pointing to the left. I get a bad feeling at this point. I've learned to heed these warnings since then and want to turn around, but she insists we keep going. Since the sign must mean it's still a road and not a driveway, it's hard to tell in these parts sometimes. So against my better judgment, we go down this road. It's pretty claustrophobic, the trees being basically on the edge of the road, so there's no room to turn around. It's pitch black, and overall, it just has a creepy vibe. We keep going for maybe a minute, and it suddenly opens up into what looks like an overgrown dirt lot. Clearly a dead end. So we go to circle around and head back, and as we swing the car around, the headlights fall on the creepiest old house I've ever seen. There is no security light, no lights in the house, and no blinds on any of the windows, so you can see straight into the house. It looks neglected, but it's not decrepit. All the windows and the door are still intact, but there's no furniture to be seen, except for a single mattress leaned against a wall. At this point, my instincts are screaming at me to get the hell out of there. So we do on our way out the house. To the right of the fork has the road illuminated with a bright light that wasn't there before. We don't think much of it, and we keep driving. We make it about 75 feet down the road when a car pulls out of the yard where the light was coming from and starts driving behind us. And suddenly it shines a spotlight straight into the car. It's from the passenger side, so I know it's not a cop. And trucks with spotlights on them are pretty common around here, mostly used by poachers for night hunting. They start to come up on us fast, and we're pretty scared at this point. So we start to speed up. And the truck does the same until we're going about 60 on this windy-ass back road, and it's still gaining on us, all while blinding us with the spotlight. We get back onto the road we turned off of and start doing about 75. Truck whips out behind us and keeps chasing. It takes about 10 minutes and several turns before we finally lose them. We still refer to it as Spotlight Road. I spent some time driving through the Pacific Northwest and South Dakota in the dead of winter a few years ago. I was by myself and basically just kind of meandering throughout the country on a road trip of sorts. I had been driving thousands of miles at that point and was very unfamiliar with that area of the country. It is extremely desolate, unpopulated, and intensely rural, with lots of intense mountains and plains covered by several feet of snow, as far as the eye can see. I had gotten into the habit of driving very late at night, like around 3 a.m. or so, when the only other people on the road were the occasional trucker or utility vehicle. Couple of weird moments. I had been driving for several hours and had seen a dim light on the horizon. I was certain that it was a town or city where I could find a motel to stay at. As I drew closer and closer, I got confused because there were no road signs, street lights, or anything. As I got within 10 miles or so, I realized that it was actually a massive oil refinery. Nothing but industrial machinery and not a soul in sight in the middle of nowhere. It really made me realize how alone I was and how if something went wrong, I'd be pretty fucked. In South Dakota, there are huge areas of land that are designated as American Indian reservations. Some of them are probably the size of a small state. I would often be driving through rural reservations late at night and not realize it. One night, I pulled to the side of the road to take a piss, assuming I was completely alone. I was shining a flashlight I had with me across the hillside, just kind of taking in the scenery as the blustering wind pounded against my coat. I turned off the flashlight and was about to turn back to my car, when I noticed far, far off in the distance, several white lights were shining back at me. It was deeply unsettling. I think someone may have thought I was trying to signal them, or the locals were just fucking with me. Who knows? I later found out that this happened on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is notoriously sketchy in or around Yellowstone Park. I was checking the air pressure on my tires near a large truck pull-off. I guess that was bordered by huge, 1,000+ foot ridgeline. I could see a bunch of bighorn sheep walking around doing whatever it is they do along the sides of the ridges. When I crouched down to check the air pressure on the final tire, about 3 feet over my left shoulder, I heard a distinctive slash growl that I'm fairly confident was a mountain lion or some other animal trying to sound like a mountain lion. It was really freaky. This was around 12 p.m. with overcast skies. I took a deep breath and spun around with my hands raised, trying to look larger, because I read somewhere like 10 years ago, that's what you're supposed to do. And there was nothing there. I ran the story by any local who was willing to listen to it for the next couple of days, and a hunter pointed out that it had been an unusually mild winter that year, and lots of animals were out hunting, prowling, or scavenging when normally they wouldn't. I have many more stories from that trip, but they mostly involve strange people and unrecognized mental health symptoms that I was experiencing at the time that resulted in weird situations. My 2-year-old son had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and we were driving back from the hospital after he had received 4 chemotherapy. As we exited the highway, something was wrong, and he started freaking out, worrying that he was having an adverse effect on the medication. We quickly pulled off into a gas station we were passing. My wife was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. I quickly jump out, grab my son out of his chair, and grab his diaper bag and bag of medications. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt next to me. The passenger leaned out the window and started yelling something at me. At first, I thought he was trying to tell me something. Problem with the car? Flat tire. But I soon realized that he was threatening me. He said something along the lines of, "Teach your women how to drive, or I'll kick your fucking ass." I guess we may have cut him off while making our hasty exit. I gave him the finger and told him to fuck off. He suddenly jumps out of the car and starts coming towards me. As a quick side note, my son was in the induction phase of cancer treatment. During this time, he was on a steroid named dexamethasone. Side effects of this drug are extreme weight gain and joint pain. In a matter of a few weeks, he had ballooned up from 25 pounds to almost 50 pounds and had lost the ability to walk due to the pain in his legs. So this guy starts aggressively moving towards me, and normally I would have put up a fight, but in one arm I had a 50-pound baby, and in the other arm I had 2 large bags. I suddenly realized that not only am I at a huge disadvantage in this fight, but it is very likely that my son will get hurt. Then it runs through my mind that if this dude is crazy enough to road rage and fight people in a gas station, he could have a weapon or really fuck us up. Plus, there were 3 other people in their car. The only thing I could do was move away from him, so I ran around my vehicle to the other side to put some space between us. My car was pulled up against a wall, so once I made it around, I had nowhere else to go. I started to panic trying to figure out what to do with my kid. I ran to the rear car door, threw it open, and put him inside. I look back up at the aggressor and realize he is turning away and getting back into the car. He slammed the door, yelled some profanities out the window, and then they sped off. This happened in February 2017. I've done a lot of reflecting on the incident since then, and have decided that while I don't think I was in the wrong, if I had just apologized to the dude instead of flicking him off, the whole altercation could have been avoided. That